Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Tim Van Orden, and this is episode 2, Discovering Discovery. We'll be starting off with some Star Trek news and then discussing the latest episode of Lower Decks.
And then we'll get to an audience question right after our main topic, beginning our discussion of Star Trek Discovery. We're really excited to get to that, so come and join us. Well, here we are. Welcome to the second episode of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. How you doing, Tim?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
I am making it, sir. We're going to get this thing recorded one way or another. That's what I'm saying at this point. So yeah, we're here. This is only our second episode. So in case you didn't join us for the last episode, what is the Gospel According to Star Trek? Just real quick, Gospel According to Star Trek is just our ongoing conversation with Star Trek from a Christian worldview perspective, and kind of centered around my books, which are the Gospel According to Star Trek. Gospel According to Star Trek Original Crew is out, and then we'll be doing other stuff later on down the line. And you can learn more at gospelaccordingtostartrek.com. So yeah, let's get into some Star Trek news, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay. If I say to you Star Trek Prodigy, do you know what I'm talking about?
Wesley Crusher?
Good answer. No, Star Trek Prodigy is the name of the Nickelodeon Star Trek series.
There's going to be a Nickelodeon Star Trek series.
Yes, and I thought about this since we last talked, because you were talking about your feelings leading up to Lower Decks. And you said, "Oh, I heard there's going to be this animated Star Trek. It's going to be for kids, yada yada." And
Right.
I got a little hung up on that. It's going to be for kids because I don't see Lower Decks as a kids show.
No, I don't either.
Right. I mean, it seems pretty grown up.
Yeah.
This may be what you were hearing about, because near the same time they announced Lower Decks, they also announced this. It didn't have a name at the time, but it's an animated series at Nickelodeon, and it is for kids.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I will definitely be watching that.
Well, yeah. Well, but here's the deal: exclusively on Nickelodeon.
Well, so if you've got like an Amazon Prime account, I think you can watch, or no, CBS
Oh,
All Access. You can watch
no.
Nickelodeon stuff.
Nope. I don't think it's going to be on CBS All Access. I think it's only going to be on Nickelodeon.
The Legend of Korra is Nickelodeon, and that's on CBS All Access.
Yeah, I know, but I'm looking at this, and let me scroll down here to the thing. Bum bum bum, because they've got this director that everybody's excited about, and I don't know him. Okay, look at this. Yeah, here it is. Star Trek Prodigy will debut exclusively on Nickelodeon in 2021.
Okay.
That's what it says. So I don't know if it's going to be on CBS All Access.
Well, here's hoping.
Here's hoping. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, on Nickelodeon, like 6 months ago,
yeah,
I would have been like, yeah, okay, whatever. Nickelodeon, that's the Slime Kids channel, right? Where they throw lots of slime around. But then, like, the quarantine happened, and I watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I'm currently watching Korra, and I'm like, Nickelodeon? Yeah, let's do this.
I'm telling you, my son's been watching that.
Which one?
Avatar: The Last Airbender and Korra.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Dude, so this is well done.
Good. Yeah,
it's good stuff. I mean, The Last Airbender's been around forever, and
yes, it has.
And you know, I knew it was probably going to be good, but anyway, but just seeing it, it's really cool. But apparently, this is like a like 3D CGI kind of thing, but it's been in the talks for a long time, and it's like it's going to happen. There's this thing, and we haven't heard anything else about it for months. And then earlier this month, they came out and said they found a director. So that's cool.
Very cool.
And the other new bit of Star Trek news is some new Deep Space Nine. Don't get too excited.
What?
Don't get too excited, but it's kind of new Deep Space Nine. Over on sidcity.net. This is Alexander Siddig's official fan website.
Okay. Be careful how you type that, kids.
Right. It'll be in the description. sidcity.net. There is a 4-part series. It's kind of like Reader's Theater, and it's a new script with some of the Deep Space Nine actors playing their old characters. Reading their parts. They're like connected on Zoom, kind of like we are, or whatever, video chat like we are.
Yeah.
And it's this 4-part remote series, and It starts with this conversation. I've only seen the beginning of the first episode, and it starts with this conversation between Dr. Bashir and Garak. So,
oh wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Is
it's
it, is it
cool.
like is it high production? Do they have beeps and noises and sound effects, or is it just
It's just reading. It's just reading the script,
okay.
but you don't need anything else. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, they're great actors. They know their characters, and it's great to see them just or hear them. I mean, you can watch them if you want to, or you can like listen to it and try to put yourself, paint the pictures in your mind.
Right.
But it's really cool.
Who's writing it?
I'm not sure who wrote it. But it's called Alone Together. It's the name of it. It posits the return of old adversaries, a conspiracy with wide-ranging consequences, and how people who have lived and worked together can come together, even when they are forced to be apart. A little bit relevant there, with the working together, even though you're forced to be apart thing.
Yeah, I imagine that was kind of the point.
I think it is the point. Yes. But yeah, Andrew Robinson is on playing Garak. I know that we also have Nana Visitors on there, playing Nerys, obviously, and Jake Sisko is on there too. And Sirach Lofton. Yeah, Sirach Lofton is on there, playing Jake. And Armin Shimmerman will be on as Quark as well. So it's pretty cool. Oh, it was It was written by what?
Who just passed away? Oh, it was Rene Auberginois.
Yeah, Renee.
That's it. Okay, for a second there, I was thinking, I thought Shimmerman passed away, but no, Shimmerman was.
We lost Renee not long after losing Aaron.
Right. Yes, Aaron Eisenberg.
So really sad.
Yeah.
Oh, this is written actually by Canadian high school teacher Matthew Campbell.
Oh, okay.
So he's also an actor. But anyway, so check it out. Yeah, and a high school teacher. So check that out. But that brings me to another bit of Star Trek news, which is another Star Trek actor we recently lost is Ben Cross. No. Ben Cross played Sarek in the first Kelvin Timeline picture. I really liked him, and I was sad to hear about that. But anyway, and one do we want to do one other piece of news if we have some time.
We do. Got about a minute and a half.
I just read an article recently, and this is just it feels like spreading gossip to say this kind of stuff. So I hate to say it, but it's out there. And somebody recently posted a copy of it in the Christian Star Trek fans Facebook group, and I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and mention it because Nichelle Nichols, she's 87 years old, she has dementia now, and declining a little bit. And there's this dispute between her manager and her family, each side saying that the other is manipulating her and not abiding by her wishes, and family claims that the manager's stolen money, and it's a bad situation. I don't know what's going on. I don't know who's right and who's wrong. I don't want to say, but it's a terrible thing to see happen to somebody like Nichelle, who is a bastion of Star Trek. Her family started a Kickstarter campaign thing, whatever, to try to raise legal fees and stuff. But it's just sad to see. And I don't want to see her. I don't want to see her go out on this note. I want to see this resolved. And so, just generally, be in prayer for Nichelle and her family and everybody involved, that justice would reign and truth would win out and all of that, because it's kind of a wreck. So
right.
And I feel really bad for her. So yeah. Oh. But Star Trek Prodigy has a new director. It's going to happen. It's going to move forward, and it's going to be good.
Very cool. But this is not the Star Trek Prodigy podcast.
It is not.
This is the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast, where we talk about the current Star Trek, such as Lower Decks.
Lower Decks is our newest Star Trek right now.
That segue?
That was a good segue. That was decent.
I don't know. I kind of felt like it was a little forced.
I am trying to make you feel good, sir. You can back me up on this or not. That's all I'm saying. I thought we were a team.
I'm being honest with myself here.
That's all right. It's cool.
Room for improvement.
It's good. It's good. No, it's fine. No, it got us there. And you're right. Yeah, Lower Decks. Episode 4, what'd you think? Moist.
Oh, crud. Moist something.
Moist.
Yeah, right?
Moist Vessel. Moist Vessel is the name of it.
Was it Vessel?
Yes.
I read the title to my wife and she cringed.
Yeah. Oh, that's a title, isn't it?
Right? I get the feeling this is going to be the norm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think so too.
The thing was, I didn't really. I didn't get how the name really fit with the episode. I'm probably just.
I think
whooshing right over my head, but
it's probably just, well, we have an excuse to use this title, and it's funny sounding, but because of the goop that is coming from the vehicle they're towing and growing to life, and then after that, after they neutralize it, then everything's wet and they're drying it all off at the end of the episode. So
I guess
the vessel was moist.
Okay.
And she was talking about, remember, Mariner was talking about the humidity in the air. She's like, the air is changing. It's getting more humid, whatever.
Okay. No, that's a good catch. That's right.
Moist vessel. So what do you think of the episode beyond the title?
It was good. It was all right.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't rock my world. It didn't, I didn't bust a gut laughing at it or anything. There was some good chuckles, some good character moments.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The whole, mother-daughter thing or parent-sibling thing where they get into a tough situation and they're forced to kind of come to terms with each other's foibles. That just feels like a really overdone trope.
Oh. Well, I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, it was effective.
Sure. It worked. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's kind of the way Lower Decks does things, though, is they do these things that are tropey. They do these things that are, it's like self-aware,
Tongue in cheek is what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And I mean,
no, not tongue in cheek though. I don't know if that's actually what I am looking for. I think it's self-aware that, okay, we're doing this kind of stock thing, right, that we know works and that we know tells a story, but we're going to have a little fun with it. We're going to play with it. And, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of how they do things.
So yeah, tongue in cheek is making fun of the very tropes and standards that you're actually using to move your own story forward.
Okay. Well, maybe that's it.
Like Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, it was very much tongue in cheek.
Yeah. Okay. That is a phrase I've never had a good relationship with. So that's.
Yeah, I didn't either until I read an article that called Buffy tongue in cheek, and I'm like, what? And so I went and I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, that kind of makes sense now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
So yeah, but I guess it's trying to be tongue in cheek. I just didn't find it. It wasn't a very good parody of that trope. They were just using the trope. They weren't also. I didn't feel like they were also making fun of it.
Yeah, I guess
or
not.
If they did, it fell flat to me.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't know. I enjoyed it. I liked the for me, the B story was maybe funnier. I don't know. Well, okay, the B story was funnier because it had one of my favorite lines. I mean, my favorite line so far in the whole series, and one of my favorite lines ever, which is the universe is balanced on the back of a giant koala. Why is he smiling? What does he know?
I did. T-shirt. I got a really good chuckle out of that whole ascension moment. That was good.
It burns. I don't want to ascend.
It burns. Yeah. I'm sorry for helping you ascend. Yeah, no, I did like. I like the beeline. The beeline was good.
That was good. And that was that side of the story probably worked a little better. But it is something that's been hanging there in the series. The relationship between Mariner and her mom. I mean, that's been there for a while, and we can't just have them always be irritating each other. There has to be something where we talk about why they irritate each other. And show that they don't always just irritate each other, and give them some love and some camaraderie together, in there, even despite their differences. So I mean, the story functioned to do that, and it needed to do that by this point in the series.
That's fair.
So I was, I like that, but the B story, the B story was pretty great, and I liked them both a lot, and I don't know. It was, yeah, it was a middle of the road kind of episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it didn't knock it out of the park like the second one, but it wasn't a strikeout like the first one. So
Right.
we're on our way. We're on our
It's
way.
it's got to find its feet.
Yeah, yeah, it will. Oh, I think it's doing pretty well, and I don't know all their. I should know the character names by now, but I don't.
Oh, the only one I know is Boimler.
Yeah,
And Mariner.
Boimler and Mariner and Green Girl and Cyborg Kid. That's who
Right.
they are. I don't know.
So, and I definitely got the vibe from this one that they weren't trying to pair those two up. That it is more of a platonic friendship.
Really?
Yeah.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think that's what he thinks. I don't think that's what she thinks.
I don't know. I think she's pretty. I feel like she's pretty forward.
Yeah, but I think she's pretty well over the moon for him.
Okay.
I do.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Well, it was like in, what is it, the second episode or something? He was like, "Oh, you wouldn't, do all this stuff just to hang out with me, And she's like, "Yeah, right, I totally did." Like
Mm-hmm.
she clearly, I mean, yeah, it's
Okay.
important to her to spend time with him, and I think, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But no, I enjoyed it. It's funny because it did kind of play on, the whole thing with the guy ascending and all that. I mean, it did kind of play on, that has been a thing that we've talked about in Star Trek,
Mm-hmm.
and Stargate too. But that's been a thing that we've talked about in Star Trek, and I liked having a comedic take on that. And
Mm-hmm. I loved the fact that he was the, just trying to get attention and being
yeah,
the
I'm the
ascending guy.
Ascension guy. Yeah, that was pretty great. But then, and I mean, I gotta bring it in a little bit. But then he's like, oh, I guess all this time I was trying to fake it, I was actually doing it, and of course, it's kind of a trope, but it does echo the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
that when he is willing to sacrifice himself, that's when he actually transcends the plane that he's at, and all that, and all that. And that's good. That's fine. That's what it is. But it does speak a little bit to the idea of orthopraxy, which is just that if you do, like, the whole idea of liturgy and ritual is that doing prescribed things even when you don't feel like it. Monks talk about this a lot. That doing prescribed things even when you don't feel like it, like engaging in spiritual discipline,
Mm-hmm.
can actually ultimately be something that's helpful for you, even if sometimes it feels kind of like empty. I think a lot of people in our generation particularly are like kind of down on religious ritual because
Mm-hmm.
it can feel empty. Hey, I'm raising my hand. I have a really hard time with religious ritual, so I get it. But I'm very aware that that's a spirituality that works for a lot of people. So just, yeah, it was interesting to see that comedically reflected in Lower Decks. But
Mm-hmm.
there you go. Yeah. But yeah, the series is finding its legs, and I think it's going to be great. I'm enjoying it so far.
I concur.
I do not, however, I still do not think it's the best Trek in decades.
No, no.
No, it's not. But that's okay. But we are in the middle of this 23 weeks of new Star Trek, which is the most new Star Trek we've gotten in a row in quite a number of years, probably since Enterprise was last on the air.
Well, more
And
than that, right? Because, like, is this going to be a solid 23 weeks in a row?
solid
'Cause
23 weeks, yeah.
even network television, they take breaks in there.
That's true. That's true. It might be longer than even we got in the fourth season of Enterprise. I don't know how the schedule worked for that. So it's possible. I don't know if they took breaks at that time. Did they take a break? I guess over Christmas or something.
Yeah. February and Christmas.
Yeah, and then pick back up. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since I watched broadcast television.
Yeah, I know, right?
Like that.
I do not miss commercials.
I know, and neither do I. But speaking of that, that was, so we're gonna talk about these about Discovery, because part of this 23 weeks, the last 10 weeks is going to be, or the last 13 weeks is going to be the new season of Discovery, season 3, and we have not been on the, yeah, no, we have not been on the air, as it were, for the previous 2 seasons. So we're going to try to kind of fly over the previous 2 seasons in the episodes we have between now and it starting, and except for next week, but we'll talk about that. But yeah, so yeah, that the whole thing of like not having that live premiere, right, in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
When Star Trek Discovery premiered, it was super exciting for me because this was the first time I was watching a live Star Trek premiere, seeing a Star Trek episode for the first time live in the living room, just glued to the TV.
First time ever?
Well, I haven't finished the sentence. A long sentence.
Okay. That's some long sentences. Boy.
Since, I guess, Enterprise. I don't actually remember, like when I saw Broken Boat for the first time, which was years later. I didn't remember the episode, but I think I tuned in and watched it. I'm pretty sure I did. I don't know. But this was certainly, I mean, I was just like, I was on the floor of the living room, like as close to the TV as I could get to watch the whole thing because I was so excited that it was new Star Trek.
Wait, weren't you over here?
No, I was.
Or had you watched it first on your own?
Well, maybe we watched it. I don't think we watched it together.
No, we didn't. We didn't. Okay. No, I watched it with my wife, I think.
You just think you watched it with me because we watch all kinds of things together.
Yeah, we
usually watch Star Trek and stuff together. But no, I watched it by myself, but it was, I don't know. How'd you feel the first episode?
I
3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago. I do remember being very disappointed.
Really?
Yeah. It was. There was a lot about it that just did not sit well with me. You probably remember, I only made it like 3 or 4 episodes, maybe 5 into the season before I gave up on it.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Because it just didn't feel like Star Trek to me at the time, and I fell into the same trap, I guess, that a lot of other people have, of wanting it to be, more TNG.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. And that was the thing for me, like, I don't know. I'm pretty good at adapting to new Star Trek. Mm-hmm. I seem to be an earlier adopter than a lot of people I know. Like particularly with the Kelvin timeline and stuff. I was all in. When that first movie came out, I was walking in the theater going, okay, if it's bad, then maybe the next one will be good because maybe it's an odd number curse.
Yeah, right.
And if it's good, maybe the next one will be bad because maybe it's an even number curse. Mm-hmm. And it was an even number curse. But hey, right. But Beyond was awesome. But no, I mean, I feel like I adapt pretty quickly. And so I was in it, but I could tell. I mean, I could feel. I'm like, whoa, this is really different. Like there's puddles of people on the floor.
Right. Yeah, it was just, it felt like, on the surface, and this will get to my question that I want.
Yeah, we got to do your question from last time.
It felt on the surface like it was just trying to be like someone who didn't understand Star Trek was trying to grab onto the current Game of Thrones dark and gritty trend, where everything needs to be realistic and gory and violent and just, gritty. And like it still does to a degree. I think it definitely toned back on that in the second season, but we're talking about the first season right now.
Right.
And I think it even, like, once you get past that, once you realize that that's just sort of the surface layer, the every generation of Trek has had its norms that it's followed in terms of style. And once you get past that and into the Star Trek, I feel like it is real good Star Trek. And that kind of leads into my question that is not a question that I had so much. It was just one that I was hoping you can answer better than I can. I was talking with a coworker trying to explain to him that I thoroughly enjoyed it. And he gave the same kind of response that I did when I initially saw it, that it just didn't feel like Star Trek because, and his reasoning was that Star Trek is about us having perfected ourselves and how we handle that when we encounter other beings with our old problems. And thinking about it now, it just feels very, very like self-congratulatory.
Yeah.
And I feel like the deeper meaning for Star Trek is it's an exploration of what it means to be human in relation to the current generation that's creating and viewing it. You know,
Yeah.
The original series was all about finding that balance between spirituality and humanity, and just, you know, dealing with people that were different than us. And I feel like today's Trek is kind of what it means to be human in a world that is very in our face, gritty and real. Like the terrorist attacks that are broadcast on television, that you can see beheadings on the internet, and there's just all these awful things going on 24/7. Our world is so dark and gritty, and I feel like this Star Trek, this Discovery, is an exploration of what it means to be human during a time that feels so grim.
Yeah. And I'm gonna layer two or three things
Please do,
on
please.
that one point, because we talk about how our time feels right now. And there's a saying that I heard a while back, and I don't know. It's probably one of those things that floats around in the ether, and who knows who said it. But or it could be a very well defined quotation, and there's a specific person who said it, and I'm totally whiffing on that. But all I know is I heard it, and it was, when you pine for the good old days, remember that during the good old days they were known as these trying times. Um, and and I was thinking, because last time we had been talking about some news, right, that was happening about, oh my goodness, Star Trek's in chaos,
Mm-hmm.
and what if Alex Kurtzman gets fired and all this stuff. And it's unsettling. And I think the article that we were looking at was reflecting how unsettling it is to fans right now that things do seem so kind of scattered and unclear in Star Trek world
Mm-hmm.
because of, you know, company mergers and things like that. But the thing is that that sort of stuff has always gone on in film and television production.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of stuff has always been happening behind the scenes.
Right, like wasn't it the third season of TOS only happened because Lucille Ball bought the bought
Actually,
something and
it was the second pilot.
oh, okay, okay,
I believe it was the second pilot, because they did the cage and then were able to come back and do Where No Man Has Gone Before. And
right,
I think it was that stage that it was Lucille Ball saved it. Yeah.
okay,
Um, but those machinations always go on, and there's always chaos, you know, and we learn about that stuff later. You know,
right,
we learn about Star Trek Phase 2 later, you
mm-hmm.
know, and stuff like that. The God thing and all these failed Star Trek projects, and the Chaos on the Bridge documentary and stuff like that. Like, we learn all that stuff later, but now we're getting a lot more of that backroom stuff live,
Because
you
of the
know,
internet.
because of the internet, because there's such a hunger for information that all these little tidbits, you know, get
Right,
sucked up into the machine. And so really, it's not that Star Trek is more chaotic than it's been in the past.
mm-hmm.
It's just we're learning about it in real time now.
Right. This stuff is stuff that we would have learned about, you know, in 5 years in the little Star Trek companion book
Right,
that
exactly,
comes out.
absolutely, exactly. If they still did those, but
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And so, well, actually, there is one for Picard season one, but
Oh,
I don't.
nice. I may have to
Yeah,
check it out.
so if you're looking for a birthday gift for me, because my birthday's coming up
Oh,
anyway.
okay. Cool, cool, cool.
Uh, but the other side of that is, like, that's true also of our culture in general, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's happening, a lot of chaos and stuff that's happening in our world. We've always known that there's bad news happening. We've always known that there's war happening, or there's disease happening, or whatever. But the more global our culture gets, and the more rapid and the more high quantity our information network becomes, the more of that stuff we get. And so there's a certain degree to which, yes, there are some pretty unprecedented things going on in our country and in our world right now, right? In terms of norms being broken, and things happening that haven't happened before, sizes of hurricanes and stuff like that. But there's also a degree to which we're learning about stuff that we would not previously necessarily have known, because there's more information coming at us. I think it was Will Smith who said, racism didn't get worse, it just got filmed.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
So
and that's a good it's like we are, as information and knowledge is becoming more prevalent, we as a society are trying to come to terms with the facts, like the Columbus controversy. Do we want to celebrate the fact that the man who discovered our country was a horrible person?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And so I think that's kind of what Discovery is, you've got your golden era of TNG, and maybe it was built on a time that wasn't as
golden
as everyone liked to think it was.
And that's really been the progress within Star Trek for a long time, because that, you're right about kind of that arrogance of the original series, that sort of self-righteousness. I mean, you can feel it right in there. And Gene Roddenberry himself had some of this. You can feel that arrogance sometimes when he's talking, or when he was talking. And it's, that's a thing that happens. People get arrogant. We're human, whatever. I'm not judging anybody, as particularly bad because of their arrogance, but it is the thing that happens. And Next Generation, I think, who was it? Gosh, I want to say it was somebody like Bob Justman, but I'm not sure. Again, this is one of those random things that I read my research for the first book, so it's been a while. But he was saying that in the original series, we were going out and we were teaching everybody, right? But in Next Generation, we were going out and we were learning. And like the big shift happens between Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, where in the other shows, we visit a planet, we solve the problem, we fly off, we never go back again, until it comes back to bite us in Star Trek 2, right? See, there it is, like Star Trek kind of correcting itself, or saying, hey, there might be more to this story. In Deep Space Nine, we have to sit with our consequences for 7 years. We're going to, and all the different people groups that we're around, and how they're interconnected, and how one decision changes something else, and how another decision changes something else, and we have to live with those consequences. So when I saw Discovery, to me, it's just like the next step in that evolution of Star Trek. That when people see darkness on the screen, when they see grittiness on the screen, see violence and swearing and sex and all that stuff on the screen in Star Trek, their reaction is immediately, oh my gosh, that doesn't feel like Star Trek. That's not right. But man, I've been watching the original series of Next Generation with my 10-year-old son and getting uncomfortable. And like, why did we turn this episode on? Like we watched yesterday's Enterprise, and I haven't seen that in 2 years. And man, when the captain of the Enterprise B gets whacked in the head, with the thing, and I was like, oh gosh, wow, that's a little more than, because he's pretty sensitive to that kind of stuff. He doesn't like, a lot of, really bloody stuff. And I was like, oh, sorry, sir, sorry. Oh my gosh, he's like, it's okay, Daddy.
Did you have to explain what fully functional meant?
No, we didn't watch that episode. We didn't watch The Naked Now. Like, I was like, oh, we're gonna skip that one. That's cool. Yeah. We did that. I mean, we aren't watching straight through. He'll just kind of pick episodes that look interesting to him, and I'll be like, yeah, we'll skip. And then some of them, like the original series, like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how sexual this episode was, And because people have always talked about like, oh, but Star Trek's a family show, and I watched it with my dad when I was 4 years old and stuff, and I'm like, you just weren't paying attention,
right?
Because it's not really a family.
Yeah,
I mean, it can be. It's more accessible, but that's really because of television standards,
right? Yeah, because nowadays what they show on TOS is tame, but at the time, I read a quote from, I think it was the costume designer, or
William Murphy's.
Who was talking about like a lot of the allure for the alien women that they do. Like he would design the costumes to make them look like his quote was, to make them look sexy, you make them look like they're about to fall off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How can it? And I think you're the one who told me about that. And I've had that in my head for a long time. That quotation by him, that it's like, how minimally can we attach the fabric to the body? Because that's what looks sexy when it looks like it's about to fall off. Yeah, exactly. Right. And I mean, that was always being pushed, and that was always being gone for, as much as it could be gone for within the format that they were in. And so, and that's the thing. It's like, okay, so now we're in TVMA world where we can really do whatever we want. And it's, but how do we keep that anchored? Like I talked about last week with Lower Decks. How are you going to earn those first two words? Star Trek. How are you going to earn that? Right. And so with Discovery, it has to earn those first two words. And particularly the end of the premiere with Giorgio's telescope, I was like, oh my gosh, this is one of the best moments because it brought it all back. But I'll tell you also, for me, when I really felt like, oh yeah, okay, this really is Star Trek, I can really recognize this as Star Trek, was the episodes that I wrote the blog posts for Trektember, for Real World Theology. That's real as in film real world
Shameless
theology.
plug.
Same shameless plug. But I wrote blog posts for the episodes "The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry" and "Choose Your Pain."
Mm-hmm.
Butcher's Knife, by the way, is one of my favorite episode titles ever. One of my favorite episodes ever. The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry. That's when we really start figuring out the tardigrade creature and everything. And that was when I was like, oh man, this is such a Star Trek story.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of story we tell in Star Trek.
Right. That's about where I checked out the first time. But even then, I was like, okay, I can kind of see what they're trying to do with the tardigrade, and I can see where they're trying to do some Star Trek here.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was still very bitter about the monetization model that CBS All Access was doing, paying for commercials. And I know there's a more expensive version where you don't pay for commercials, but at the time there was one show that I wanted to watch on CBS All Access, and that was just ridiculous. So I still tuned out, but getting back into it from there, it really does start ramping up the Star Trek.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, and it's so funny that we're having this conversation. We're not going to get off onto the other series because we do need to talk about Picard at some point, but Picard is so dramatically different in almost every respect from any Star Trek that's ever happened before, right? Mm-hmm. But because it's Patrick Stewart and it's Jean-Luc and it's Seven of Nine and whatever, I feel like people object less to Picard than they do to Discovery, which more closely follows the structure of Star Trek, which I find interesting. But again, it's the things that people always object to, and it's the same thing with Alice Eve in the 2009 film. No, not the 2009 film, but Into Darkness. When Star Trek gets too sexy, or the decon scene in Broken Bow for Enterprise, when it gets too sexy, when it gets too violent, when they swear too much, Star Trek fans complain.
Well, now, sometimes there's a legitimate complaint.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not.
If it's there just to be there, just to draw eyeballs, then I think you've got a legitimate complaint that, hey, there's no reason for this to be here other than you want to show some flesh on the screen to get more people to watch your show.
I will give you that in Into Darkness with Alice Eve, it's probably pretty good, pretty safe to make that to make that distinction, to say that. Mm-hmm. But in general, I don't disagree with you, but at the same time, it is really hard to know when that's the case.
Absolutely.
I think
it is. And I will be the first to admit that I was wrong. Like that was what turned me off of Voyager. I was enjoying Voyager up until Seven of Nine came along. And I was so righteously indignant about her walking around in that skin tight suit the whole time. Because I'm like, the only reason you're doing this is to get eyeballs and to drive up your viewership numbers. But she turned out to be like the best character.
She's a great character
on the series.
But the thing is, you're not wrong about the other side of it, though. I mean, you're just not. I mean, the sexy girls in Star Trek have always been there to be sexy girls. Mm-hmm. That's just a really sad fact of Star Trek. Okay.
I mean, it's a sad fact of television and film.
Yeah, right. But given especially the values that Star Trek espouses, right? Mm-hmm. We kind of expect it to be a little better at. But there have been, there's another imbalance. There's kind of a lack of female writers and directors and producers until more recent Star Trek. I mean, more recent Star Trek is much more, which is great because like women kind of founded Trekdom. You know,
really?
Women really pioneered Star Trek fandom.
Huh.
We have conventions and we have being a Trekkie because of female fans. They were really the ones who organized and made this stuff.
Impressive.
Yeah, and so women have always been huge in Star Trek, except in Star Trek itself, right? Even when we get women on the screen, and there's a whole podcast called Women at Warp, Women at Warp. It's a Roddenberry podcast. It's really great.
Okay.
They talk about these kinds of things every week. I don't know if it's every week, but every episode they talk about these things.
I may have to recommend that to my wife.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's a really cool podcast. But there's always been kind of this lack of female voices behind the scenes, and that carries out into the series as they are. And so it's a little weird that, like, in Discovery, it's like, oh look, we have this lead character who is not only a person of color but a woman. Like, that's a big deal, right? I mean, we had a female captain before, right? Janeway.
Right.
We've had that before. We had a black captain before. We had Cisco. And this person is not the captain, but she's still kind of the center of the show, which
she's clearly the lead.
Yeah, which is a really unique take. It's really interesting. It's a great way to tell a story. It's a cool way to tell a story, to come into a world where things feel a little off because the captain isn't the center of our story. And really, if you look at the way Michael's story starts and the way her narrative kind of dominates that first episode, it's very similar to the way Ben Sisko's narrative dominates the opening of Deep Space Nine. It's not dissimilar. It's very much the same. So when people are like, "Oh, it's all about Michael Burnham," like, yeah, but Deep Space Nine is all about Ben Sisko. I mean, he is the linchpin of that whole series. Everything is about his arc. As ensemble as that series was, and I will say that Discovery hasn't been, at least at first, hasn't been as ensemble as it could or should be.
Right.
But
material for, in its defense, and this is probably material for the next episode. I feel like the second season definitely started getting into some ensemble-y.
There was a lot that was fixed. That was kind of, I didn't say fixed. It was changed in the second season, and I think that was the intention already. But it was just, we got to push it. We got to go there a little faster because fans aren't keeping up with us. But I appreciated that it was telling stories differently. But it's just weird that we have, I don't know. It just seems like the series where we let the women lead. Like, you get a little more grumbling in the fans, and I don't want to draw any connections. I don't want to connect any dots or speak to anyone's motives who I don't know. But it's just kind of interesting that happens. I don't know. But I appreciated that Discovery was decentralizing the traditional Star Trek narrative within a kind of traditional Star Trek structure. It's still a ship show. We still have a captain, but the captain is like mysterious and suspicious and maybe evil, and like, what's going on?
Lorca.
Yeah.
And the second time you watch that season, oh my gosh, there were so many little moments that you're just like,
why didn't I see it?
Yeah,
he's Lucius Malfoy, for goodness sakes. I should have known. But yeah, but it's fun because it does keep you guessing. And if you read my blog post, another shameless plug, but if you read my blog post on Choose Your Pain, I talk about Lorca from the perspective of seeing that episode for the first time. And it's really interesting to read that and read like the ethical questions raised around Lorca's actions in that context versus when you know where his character is going to go from there on out, and how does that change that conversation when you revisit that episode. So that's kind of a fun thing. I haven't gotten to go down that rabbit hole myself, but our dear listeners could do that. Go back and read that blog post and see what you think about it. But that sense of destabilization, right? Does that not reflect the culture and the world within which we live right now? Doesn't everything feel a bit off, a bit destabilized? And how do we as human beings, how do we centralize ourselves? How do we ground ourselves when things are so destabilized? Where do I find God in the chaos? Right? I think that's a question that you have to deal with. And I think Star Trek in its own way through Discovery is doing that. I think a lot of, I look at Burnham as such a determined character. And a lot of that determination for her is that nope, it's got to be better than this. There's got to be something better than this. You see it with her all the time. She just won't accept less than the best. And she's always going for that. She's always going for, what can we do to really, truly, like, I don't want to take half measures. How do we carry this all the way?
Mm-hmm.
How do we run all the way to the end of that field? And that kind of long vision is really important at a time when things are uncertain. So I appreciate that about her.
Yeah,
And the
I
series.
it hadn't occurred to me, but when you speak about her like that, she's a very inspiring character.
Oh yeah, I think so. And there again, and there is where I do have a critique of Discovery, because I've never been okay with her being Spock's adopted sister.
Really?
That has always bothered me. It's always felt forced. And a friend of mine and I were talking about that, and she was like, "Yeah, it's like they tried to give her credibility by tying her into the franchise through Spock,
Mm-hmm.
but she's a strong enough character to stand on her own.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't need Spock to legitimate her. She's strong enough on her own."
Yeah, I
And
agree wholeheartedly, but I have to say, and yeah, absolutely. When I first learned that was another thing that turned me off at the start, because it did, like you said, it felt forced, and it felt like
yeah,
they were just doing it to shoehorn her into the continuity, right?
right.
But and again, this is stuff material for next episode. But I love the two of them as siblings.
I do. I agree with
I
that.
I absolutely love it.
When she and Ethan Peck really start playing brother and sister, I like that.
I adore that relationship.
But just narratively, I've always kind of pushed against it. It's always felt a little. And there are some
No,
others,
that's fair.
some other decisions with Spock in season 2 and stuff.
It's your 7 of 9 moment.
Maybe, not really, but it's always made me a little uncomfortable, and I'm not sure it is what it needs to be. But it is what it is. And at the end of the day, this is still, in my opinion, the words that kept coming out of my mouth at the end or in the middle of so many episodes of Discovery where this is just excellent Star Trek.
Right.
Because it just is. I understand the things that make people uncomfortable about it.
Mm-hmm.
They made me uncomfortable at first too, but I just
to put a cap on it, at the end of the day, Burnham being the adopted sister gets us Spock, gets us Pike, gets us Strange New Worlds.
You're darn right, sir. You're darn right.
And I mean, you could have just stopped at Pike, because Pike was amazing. But again, next episode. Clearly, there's going to be more to gush about. But for now, we've got a question.
Yes,
I think from the Christian Star Trek fans group on Facebook.
Yep. Of which I'm an admin, so I mean
okay.
That's why that's a place that yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
So the question that comes to us today: have you ever considered the original series as the Old Testament and the Next Generation series as the New Testament?
No. How's that for an answer?
Succinct.
Not really. I mean, no. I mean, I kind of get what it's. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. That feels very much like it's trying to force biblical terms or biblical outlines onto the series, and that's not the point.
Yeah, but at the same time, I applaud people for even starting down that road. Like,
sure,
and because you and I have been doing this for quite a few years, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure every series that we watch, I ask you who the Christ figure is in this series.
Right, exactly. And there is a Christ figure in a lot of the series, which actually kind of irritates me, because when I found Data as a Christ figure, I was like, this is awesome. And then when I found Spock as a Christ figure, I'm like, great, 2 complementing Christ figures. And then they kept popping up, and I was like, when are they going to stop? I can't handle this many Christ figures in Star Trek. Stop it. Well, I mean, it's a reasonable question, and
sure.
And I never find things to be like a one-to-one analog,
right?
But there's a degree to which I feel like the New Testament does sort of refine ideas that are in the Old Testament, refines messages that are in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
There's a that great quote that's being bandied about right now a little more than usual from Martin Luther King Jr. that there's an arc to the moral universe and it bends toward justice, which is not to say that it does that all on its own. We
Mm-hmm.
have to work for that too, but that is what it means to create a moral universe, is to bend the arc of the universe toward justice. I think is what Dr. King is essentially saying, because he wasn't expecting it to happen by magic. But I think there's some things in the Old Testament that a lot of Christians and non-Christians can't relate to or find objectionable or don't understand. And I think the role of Jesus, um, in a very real sense, as a prophet, because he's not just savior and Messiah, right? He's also as a part of that, as a prophet, and a
Mm-hmm.
prophet is a bringer of truth. And
Right.
in the Bible, we're particularly talking about people who are bringing us messages from God, right?
Yeah,
We're
we
talking
should
about,
clarify, if I can interrupt you real quick. A
yeah,
prophet in biblical sense isn't necessarily someone who, quote, predicts the future. A
right.
prophet is someone who is speaking for God.
Yeah, speaking the truth of God to their culture and to their time. Maybe it includes what's going to happen in the future, maybe it doesn't. A lot of it is really prescribing what's going on and saying, hey, you you are a wicked and adulterous generation, and or hey, you need to stop doing this thing, or
Right. It's
you
it's
need to
like a
hear this
parent.
message from God.
It's like a parent telling their child, if you touch the hot stove, your
You're
hand
gonna
is
burn
going
your
to
hand.
burn.
Yeah,
Right.
right. It's definitely that kind of thing. And John the Baptist was a prophet, and Jesus even said he was Elijah returned to earth, which is another prophet. But Jesus came as a prophet, and as a prophet, he said the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. He said this sums up the law and the prophets, like all of the law and the prophets, which is a lot of stuff. It it all means this. So there's this kind of clarity that comes in the New Testament. For me, looking at it particularly through Jesus, Jesus tends to kind of cut right to it and simplify stuff. To my mind, I mean, he speaks in parables and he does a lot of mysterious, weird stuff things too. But compared with the Old Testament, for me, I feel like there's clarity brought in the New Testament that we didn't have in the Old Testament, or it helps us to understand the Old Testament a little bit. So there is between the original series and the next generation, there is a refinement. This is, when you're looking at original series, animated series, next generation, that's Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek
Mm-hmm.
more than anything else. And among those, the place where the vision is the clearest is next generation. Next generation, Gene agreed to do because he was given pretty much carte blanche. He had much more creative freedom to shape things the way he wanted them to. So really, Next Generation is a truer vision of Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek than the original series is. But Next Generation stands on the original series. Wouldn't exist
Mm-hmm.
without the original series. And the original series is great, and there's a lot of good stuff in it, you know? But we may be able to understand a little more clearly in Next Generation. So in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, they do kind of
I
reflect.
can
You
see.
can think of, not so much like I would say, oh, look, they're one-to-one comparison, but
Mm-hmm.
that vision of how the worldview and the progress of Star Trek kind of translates between original series and next generation can give you a little bit of an idea. If you're new to the Bible, whatever, can give
Mm-hmm.
you a little bit of an idea, not comprehensive, but sort of a doorway into the relationship between the Old Testament and the New. There's a line in my favorite film, The Last Temptation of Christ, where one of the priests says to Jesus, "What, has God changed his mind about the old law?" And Jesus says, "No, he just thinks our hearts are ready to hold more. That's all." And I feel like it's a really great summation of Jesus, doing that, of saying this sums up the law and the prophets, and I've come to fulfill the law, not to abolish it. And he fulfills the law by liberating us from it, right? Like that whole Messiah thing that he does is revolutionary. um but it's not that God changed God's mind, it's that um it's time for a greater revelation to break forth.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, while no, I don't necessarily view the original series and Next Generation as the Old and New Testaments, it's kind of a cool way to think about them. So thanks for the question. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And so it just occurred to me while we were talking about this, my wife asked a question for the podcast. If it's too on the spot to answer in the 3.5 minutes we have left, she was basically like, we were talking about Gene Roddenberry and his views on everything. It was that section of the podcast that we were listening to, and she was wondering how do you think like this, like Discovery and Lower Decks and even Enterprise is so far removed now from Gene Roddenberry's influence. It's had so many hands and so many fingers and so many chefs in the kitchen. How do you think they're still able to, or even how well are they furthering or staying true to Gene's attempts to look at humanity?
By focusing on things that are greater and larger and more important than Gene Roddenberry. When Next Generation was in production, when Gene died, and Rick Berman, who took over for Gene, tells this story that they were talking, and Gene had died, and they were trying to break stories and stuff. They were trying to talk about things, and Gene had some really strict ideas about what should and should not happen on screen in Star Trek. And he was always bumping heads with the writers over that stuff. There's a great story about Ron Moore's first episode that he wrote, that I think it was the first one he wrote, that really illustrates this really well. But there was always that sense of Gene had all these rules, and he kind of put the writers in a box. And it was that feeling of the writers trying to break out of the box, but Gene just died. Like, do we really, we really ready to start, kind of breaking the old man's rules? And there was a bust of Gene on Rick's desk, and he took a little ribbon out from his pocket and just tied it around the eyes of the Gene bust, like a little blindfold.
Uh-huh.
and it was like, Gene's here, he's present, we keep him in mind, but he doesn't have to know everything we're doing. And that bust with that blindfold stayed on Rick's desk for the rest of that run of Star Trek.
Wow.
And I think what that kind of speaks to, and what that kind of does, is say Gene was just a guy. I was thinking earlier today about kind of heroes of mine or stuff, and I was like, I would not list Gene Roddenberry as one of my heroes. I mean, I'm grateful to God for Gene Roddenberry because of Star Trek. I love Star Trek. Gene had so many great ideas and so many things, but we also attribute a little too much to Gene and lionize him a little too much and glorify him a little too much. He was a man. He was a guy.
He had his faults.
He had definite faults. And there are people who will tell you nothing but his faults. And so that's out there. But the thing is that in all his brokenness, right, with Star Trek, he was stabbing at something that was much greater than himself, than all of us. And because I think he was bumping up against the gospel, because he was looking for the culmination of the gospel without the gospel, right? Because he was trying to figure out how this God thing that he believed in as an intrinsic part of humanity existed in a world where religion would fall out of favor, would fall out of fashion. He's trying to forge this path, and there's, some of it's good, some of it's bad, whatever. Some of it falls short, but I think as long as Star Trek keeps that in mind about those questions about what it means to be human, and keeps circling back to those same ideas about what makes us who we are as a species, then that's how we keep the vision of what matters about Star Trek, which is not just what Gene's vision was, but that there's a core to it. Gene used to say that he had a Star Trek dream world, which was the Star Trek that he had in his head. And then there was the Star Trek that was on TV that had all the fist fights and the bodice busting and all this stuff that you needed to sell toothpaste.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Right?
Right.
Because the Star Trek Dream World was too perfect to make a good television show off of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think. That's what I think Star Trek has continued to do. And we can talk later about how it's done that and why, because it's such a complex thing.
Sure.
Especially at this stage, 50 some odd, nearly 55 years on. It's such a complex thing. The fact that we've been able, even though there are times we've gone far afield, I'm looking at you, Threshold. But there are times we've gone far afield. I'm looking at you, Into Darkness. We've managed to dial it back in time and time again. And that's because I think, people who have good intentions about humanity and good intentions about the things that make Star Trek, keep being involved in it. And that's honestly, that's the grace of God. That's really what that is. And it's the goodness of people, which is also the grace of God. So, hey.
And that is a great way to end today's episode.
It is. Look at the privilege you get being married to one of the hosts.
I know, right?
That's pretty cool. Thanks, Beth. Tim, what do we have coming up next week?
Next week, we're going to be covering episode 5 of Lower Decks, not 4 or 3. And we'll be having our first guest, David Atwell, not David Attenborough, of Real World Theology, will be here to talk about Trektember. So our listeners certainly won't want to miss that.
That sounds fantastic. And that's Real World Theology. Real as in film real. There's a link in the description. So I hope you'll join us, everybody. In the meantime, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, be sure to ring that bell. Also, send us your questions. Gospel According to Star Trek on Twitter and on Facebook, or gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. You can send those questions in. We would love to discuss your question on the show. Tim, do you have anything else to say to the folks at home?
Yes, no, whatevs.
Thanks. I appreciate that. That's going to wrap it up for this edition for the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time,
I'm Kid Tim.
Nobody's going to get the joke. You can't do that.
I'm Tim Van Orden.
And I'm Kevin Sinise. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, he really did live long and prosper.
I'm doing the sassy Vulcan salute now. See you next time.